that way. But this is it's. I think we're live. Yeah, we're live.
Does it not show?
Right, let's just grab the link.
I mean, there's one laptop. I'm sure you guys know. I think it's just PC. Should just wait.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. I didn't know that. But once it's says
Maybe I messed it up. I'll turn it off. Oh.
that's right. Should work.
Okay.
That's one like 5 minute presentations. Oh, you know when you're coming to the prayer that you're saying about this is the easiest.
I think it's got everything in. It's got everything. Oh, sorry.
I'm just typing fire emoji.
Why is he
I love him so much. He's giving jobless actually since he's graduated, even though he's very much employed.
He's not college.
I found this out. They were texting on LinkedIn, and I was like, "You realize that's Alicia's boyfriend, right?" And he was like, "No, this can't be the very same parent from the smoking area." And I was like, "Yes, that's him. Actually, he is a professional. Actually." I was like, "I told you. I told him. I was like, his name is Pat. He's at Imperial, okay? Like he's by, is it Pike? He's by altitude. Exactly. And I was like, why do you not come with you? Right?
How many of them do you think there are?
Bro, he's so.
Oh, I
he's
thought
just,
he knew.
He's so.
I knew. He was active. He was like, oh, why not?
He didn't know until literally it must have been this morning or something. But anyway, okay. Okay, are we ready to begin?
Yeah.
All right, brilliant. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to another one of our Neurotech 101, 102 workshops. This one is all to do with neurostimulation. Wendy and Alicia are co-presenting with me. Actually, Alicia's leading most of it, so I'm going to hand it to her. Not really. She is. But
I think it's pretty even.
I think it's pretty even. I guess we'll see. But yeah, I'm going to hand over to them now. And yeah, I hope you enjoy it.
So I don't know if you guys have been here for like the other like one that we did earlier in the first semester. It's fine if not. That was about neuroimaging, but we're pretty much following the same structure. And we'll start first with like what is neurosimulation and what are some neurosimulation techniques. So these are the aims. So we first have the presentation. So the standard techniques and methods are used. Then we have a little bit of a discussion about how brain simulation is handled in industry, different companies, startups, etc. And finally, we'll conclude with a little bit of a journal club. And you can find the papers we'll be discussing in the group chat if you're a part of that, but it's fine if you're rather great. Otherwise, we'll just talk about some of the key points together.
Yeah, so first of all, I'll be talking about the presentation bit. So basically just a bit of background information. What is neurostimulation? Well, it's basically about a lot of neuroscience before like the 20th century has been about observing the brain using MRI, EEG, etc. But now there's more of a shift, a paradigm shift towards actually monitoring and also deliberately changing brain activity. And they do this by 3 different types of modalities, specifically electrical, which is represented by TDCS, which we'll talk about later, magnetic or mechanical energy. And the aims of neurostimulation, there's mainly three. At a cellular level, it's to increase or decrease cortical excitability, so whether or not neurons fire. And on a larger scale, it would be to alter network dynamics. And ultimately, all neurostimulation, at least in industry, the ultimate goal is to produce behavioral effects, whether that be reducing a tremor or cognitive enhancements. And neurostimulation can be categorized by two different categories. So it's invasiveness. So non-invasive would be without surgery. Invasive would be with surgery, and energy modalities as discussed here. And first of all, we'll be talking about invasive modalities, and first, not non-invasive modalities. And the first I will be introducing is called TMS, and this uses the modality of magnetic stimulation. So basically, you hold a coil of wire through someone's scalp, and then this will create electromagnetic induction. The coil will create a perpendicular electrical field, and this specifically targets suprathreshold, which is actually to where neurons can become depolarized and actually increase in excitability. And later on, we'll look at subthreshold. And there are two different types of TMS specifically: single pulse, which is used for individual neurons, so to map where a neuron is firing, and RTMS, which basically stands for repetitive, modulates long-term excitability. And at high frequencies, this actually can mimic LTP-like, which is long-term potentiation, so towards synaptic plasticity. And lower frequencies can actually be inhibitory. And one specific study that shows this is done in 2007, and basically they ran a randomized control trial involving 301 patients with MDD, major depressive disorder, and they used TMS in this in double-blind situations. But most specifically, these patients were all medication resistant, and so previous medications did not work for them. And they found that actually through targeting the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Why there specifically? Well, this is a part of the brain that is hypoactive, so it's underactivated in depression patients. And they found that when you targeted this specific area, there was a significant reduction in depression scores, and this actually led to the first case of FDA approval for TMS to be used in depression. And moving on, we just talked about magnetic stimulation, and this is electrical stimulation, which is the other modality we mentioned at the start. And as I mentioned previously, this is a subthreshold stimulation, so it actually doesn't make them fire more or less. It simply just primes the neuron to make it to where it's more susceptible to further excitability. So there's two main types of TES. One is direct current, and you can see on the graph here, it's just one singular pulse. And TACS, which is alternating currents, it simulates brain rhythms. So I don't know if you guys know alpha, gamma, theta. Alpha is for relaxation. Gamma is for attention, and theta is for memory. So basically, they simulate these sorts of brain waves within the brain, and they actually target specific brain areas through stimulating these brain waves to, for example, retain memory or like retain attention. And this uses spike timing. So instead of direct current, where it basically just stimulates a specific neuron, alternating current actually impacts where in the brain it actually fires. So the second one would be more synchronicity. It's also why it's called entrainment. And there's a study called Nishk and Polis, was one of the first studies to use direct current in humans, and they applied weak direct currents at the primary motor cortex, and they found that specifically stimulation at the anode actually depolarized membrane and increased excitability, whereas stimulation from the cathode actually hyperpolarized membranes and actually decreased the excitability. So this sort of shows that there's like different types of ways you can stimulate through TES, and it can bring about different results.
For repetitive TMS, how do you actually like target a specific region? Do you just like put it close to like one part of the brain?
Yeah, in general, for like all TMS and also all non-invasive, we kind of try to like put it as close as possible to where it would be like outside, from outside. But like I think later when we get to the companies, I think there's one company where you can see the different types and how they have different shapes to target different regions. So you can do that. But yeah, essentially the answer is they try to put it as close as possible. So if it's like prefrontal cortex, you put it like on the forehead. In fact, there's a lot of companies also like looking at making like headbands or like patches that go on the forehead if you're trying to control that area. But if we go into other areas, then like maybe it's behind the ears, at the back of the head, etc.
All three of the non-invasive ones are like coils because non-invasive is non-surgical in nature, and so they kind of face the same like disadvantages of it being not penetrating deep enough into the brain or like low resolution, which we'll talk about later. But basically, the main point is like there's TES, which is electrical, TMS, which is magnetic, and this is TUS, which is ultrasound. So it's like different types of non-invasive modalities, but they basically all do the same thing, but through different types of modalities, as I said through like the first slide. So this specifically uses ultrasound, and it's called acoustic neuromodulation, and this uses a very low intensity focused ultrasound specifically in most industrial contexts. And this basically, instead of making a neuron fire more, this actually changes the membrane, whether or not it holds voltage well, and therefore this can open or inhibit certain ion channels. And for this reason, this compared to TES, electrical, or TMS, magnetic, can actually achieve a higher spatial resolution. And specifically in one study, they targeted the somatosensory cortex, and they found that this demonstrated much higher spatial resolution, whereas the techniques before were maybe centimeters in terms of scale. This actually reached 5 milliliters, and it was able to actually detect specific action potentials called somatosensory excited potentials, and they found that this ultrasound simulation was able to alter the participants' sensory discrimination. So basically, whether or not they were able to like tell, for example, what they're holding is a coin, or let's say something heavier. They were able to sort of use ultrasound to impact how well the participant could discriminate between different items, essentially. And they found that through identifying the very, very intricate somatosensory excited potential. And this sort of, as said before, this offers a higher spatial resolution, and this is sort of like one of the newer techniques in non-invasive modalities. And overall, as mentioned previously, non-invasive neurostimulation techniques have minimal side effects, and they are reversible. However, they do lack lower precision and depth, as said before. And also, every time you insert a coil onto like your head surface, it really depends on where you put it. For example, if you sort of move it like every time, let's say you do a recording, you have to make sure the place you put the coil is like the same every time, or else you might be detecting different populations of neurons. So therefore, a lot of these studies suffer from variable findings due to inconsistent placement. And also, since it's not surgical, they're not able to find long-term data. And to get long-term data, a patient will need to come into the clinic like every week, and that can be quite time-consuming as a result.
And all of these are like kind of like hints of what we're going to discuss in the first part. So if you haven't like read the papers, and so like you don't have notes, maybe like write some of these down, and then you can see it later, and we're going to clap for you. You're going to have like a disadvantage for like the papers. But yeah, now we're going to move on, thank you, Alicia, to like the invasive techniques that Aisha is going to present to us.
So I'm pretty sure people have probably already heard of the two main ones we're focusing on. So the first one's DBS, so that's obviously deep brain stimulation. And we also, I feel like the reason why you hear about it so much is because it is already used. You meet patients at the NHS who use it. It's primarily for Parkinson's, but can also be used for essential tremor, dystonia, and OCD. It works by basically being surgically implanted, so electrodes are placed in specific subcortical nuclei, and then they emit high frequency stimulation, and the inhibition of overactive, the overactive target nucleus is what we think disrupts the pathological synchrony. So it's reversible, and it's a good option. Like I said, it's already offered on the NHS for some patients to combat tremor, and it's helping to establish DBS as a safer, adjustable alternative to permanent surgical lesioning. Yes. Do you want to? And then with vagus nerve stimulation, which again is something I feel like people hear about a lot, especially on like the emerging market of neurotech devices and especially like wellness devices. It stimulates the afferent vagus nerve fibers, which lead to the brainstem and then the locus coeruleus and the nucleus. They release, they cause a release norepinephrine and serotonin. It can remove the seizure threshold. And there's IVNS, so invasive, which means the pulse generator is implanted in the chest, wires wrapped around the cervical vagus nerve, or in transcutaneous VNS, it simulates the auricular branch of the vagus nerve at the ear.
Oh, and also vagus nerve stimulation is one that is being investigated as a non-invasive type, which some of the startups will talk about later on. Specifically, that transcutaneous VNS is they're making it more invasive and accessible to the average person.
One of the papers as well is comparing it to another non-invasive technique. So it's kind of like something that straddles both. It's depending on how you're applying it, always targeting the same nerve. It can be either invasive or non-invasive.
Cool. So in terms of advantages and disadvantages of invasive techniques, we have the opposite of the disadvantages for non-invasive in that number one is that there is high precision and efficacy, which notoriously non-invasive methods just don't quite do. And they're also continuous and consistent, so useful for chronic symptoms. But the disadvantages, which I think in some ways are really a lot more massive than non-invasive, are first of all surgical risk, which obviously you have that surgical risk with any procedure you agree to, even if it's just like having a tonsils out. But I think it adds this extra layer of complication, and it's a reason why we don't see invasive techniques being used as widely. Also, obviously, high cost of maintenance, and then also side effects, so behavioral changes, impulsivity, and disturbed sleep patterns, and of course, a high barrier to access. So it's not available for everybody everywhere. And I think that's another really massive disadvantage. But we put them side by side here. So take a little look and maybe have a note down if you haven't already before we move on to the next section, which Wendy is going to do, which is all about industry.
All right, thank you, Aisha. So now we're moving on from like the first part, that is a more general introduction overview for maybe people who don't do neuroscience or like are very new to neurotech. Those are techniques that have been established for like decades. We use them all the time. But more recently, we have different companies, startups, founders that are finding new ways to like adapt these standard techniques into maybe new applications. Some of them are not revolutionary, maybe just you like alter something like small to make it more easy to use or more easily distributed. But yeah, now we'll like look at some real world examples of how these techniques are used. So before we started, we didn't want to just like talk at you for like the whole hour and a half. So we just have a couple warm-up questions, and feel free to like share if you have like answers ready. But the first is like if you were to be given access to a neuromodulation device right now, what would you use it for? Like, what do you think is something like maybe you'd use it on yourself? You can maybe use some of the examples we mentioned earlier for inspiration. Or what do you think it should be used for, like on a general population scale? Like, do you think there's something in particular that needs to be addressed that we can use these devices for? Yeah, focus is a big one, especially we don't have like a specific focus related one, but there is a lot of them that are like maybe not so much medical, but I think we do have a lot of focus on like how can we treat depression or like dystonia, Parkinson's disease. But there's also is like the part of the field that doesn't really care about like such like medical therapeutic focuses, but instead wants to use it for like more meditation or more at home use. So like that's good.
Some of the
application.
TBS, the alternating current ones. I forgot which one.
For,
It
like,
was like gamma,
synchrony, yeah.
gamma, alpha theta. One of
Yeah.
the one is for memory and retention. So they are trying to simulate like what your brain, like for example, when you're like deep in concentration, they're trying to like see what sort of brain waves are present. They're trying to like simulate that through ultrasound. That's like one of the ways that they're trying to touch on that, I guess.
Yeah, so moving on to the second question. Of course, we just covered like, the disadvantages of some of these techniques, and that's what many of these companies are aiming to like fix. So do you think there's like one in particular for either invasive or non-invasive techniques that really need to like be addressed because it's limiting the usefulness of the method that would otherwise be very good? I can start, and well, I can start. I'm also finished, but I don't think I'm just gonna have like any suggestions, which is like fair enough. But I think one of the biggest ones that we need to address in terms of, especially the non-invasive ones, like I think they're like preferable just because of the fact that they're not surgical. But I think we need to find a way of actually like making them more reliable, and we'll see, like we mentioned earlier, also at the end, how this is a problem. So like how can we make coils and headsets, whatever, that always stimulate the same place? So if we're doing like research or like recordings, combining neuroimaging that we talked about last time, how can we make sure that we're getting verbal results because of something actually happening in the brain and not just because you're stimulating a different subpopulation of neurons? And I think this can also just be something like design. So like I don't know if it can do like something particular on your head, so like it's easier to remember like in the next session like where you were stimulating. But yeah, those are like things to consider that, well, that's not an idea from any other companies, so like if anyone wants to like use that, feel free. But yeah, and are you yourself interested in developing a product in this field? Like I don't know if anyone's aiming to be like maybe on the more entrepreneurial side. If anyone has like any dreams of making a neuromodulation device. You?
Oh, it's very quick now. That's so sad. I mean, of course, I have dreams. You know, then there's also, you know, political and economic state of the world. But yeah, of course I have dreams.
Okay, that's good. Let's see. Okay, so the first thing we're going to start with is Medtronic neuromodulation. And if you've heard of any of these companies, it's very likely that's this one, just because they don't only do neuromodulation. That's why it's like a subset of the larger company, but they do like so many things in the Neurotech space. And they're globally one of the largest medical technology companies, and they have been a long-standing leader in clinical neurostimulation devices. What they do is that they develop and commercialize a broad portfolio of neuromodulation therapies, and these include DBS for movement disorders, or Parkinson's, spinal cord stimulation for chronic pain, as well as other implantable systems. Your BrainSense adaptive DBS platform, for example, uses real-time signals to tailor simulation automatically. So this is combining like the recording aspect that we maybe talked about in the neuroimaging workshop with your stimulation part of the device. And it's very common to do this combinatorial thing, which is why Medtronic is so popular. And so like why their work matters is that their technology span the most widely adopted therapeutic modulation interventions, and they have pioneered closed loop and adaptive stimulation models. So closed loop is a word that comes up like over and over again. And essentially what it means is it has like this feedback response. So you're stimulating, you're detecting how you're stimulating, when it's the correct amount of stimulation, and then you're adjusting your stimulation based on that. So that's like a very important aspect, especially if you want to like get these devices to patients to use at home. They might not be able to regulate it by themselves, so it's good that they have these like loops that do it automatically. As such, they influence clinical standards and they improve outcomes for large patient populations with conditions such as Parkinson's and also chronic pain. And on their website, they emphasize that their commitment is to helping patients as well as providing health equity and doing so in a sustainable manner. Next, we have Livanova, which is a medical device company that focuses on both neuromodulation and cardiac technologies. And this is kind of summarized by the catchphrase, which is medical devices for the head and also the heart. And essentially, what they do is that they specialize in vagus nerve stimulation, which we discussed earlier, and they do it through implantable pulse generators and leads that deliver electrical stimulation to the vagus nerve. And they do it primarily for epilepsy and treatment-resistant depression. So a lot of times when you see depression mentioned in these applications, it's often after like antidepressants or psychotherapy have failed. So it's kind of like a last resort because, for example, this one you can see in the image there, it's actually implanted. So it's a little bit of a big thing to do, like just like right out of the gate when someone is diagnosed with depression. So it's kind of a pathway you have to get to, but it's shown to have promising effects. And in terms of the difficult to treat depression, the device that is used is called Symmetry. And it is a small implanted device that's placed under the skin in a short outpatient surgery. And it works by stimulating the left vagus nerve that passes through the neck. And this vagus nerve is connected to areas of the brain that are associated with controlling mood, which is why stimulating it has an effect on the symptoms of depression. And why it matters is because LivaNova's platform is a well-established therapeutic option, and it provides an alternative for when medications don't work. And this is especially useful for patients that have severe neurological and psychiatric conditions. Its regulatory authorizations, including for younger patients, broaden access to VNS therapy. So um, a lot of these techniques are only approved for like patients that are 18 and over, but there is more research into like looking at it in teenagers, which is when these psychiatric conditions are often diagnosed. Next, we have Pulsetto, which is a Lithuanian health tech company that is working more in the wearable neuromodulation space. So how it's similar to the previous one we looked at is that it also targets the vagus nerve, but unlike the Renova, it's not invasive, and instead it does it through a wearable. You can see in the picture that you put around your neck. So, and it's also geared at different applications, so not so much epilepsy, for more things like anxiety and stress reduction. So what they do is that they produce a non-invasive vagus nerve stimulation wearable, and it's involved, like I mentioned, in anxiety management and autonomic regulation through gentle electrical stimulation of the cervical vagus nerve. And their work represents a consumer-focused application, and it brings research into nerve stimulation into everyday wellness products. So this kind of relates to what you were saying earlier with focus. Even though this is not for focus, it's like something that's very much geared towards using independently at home. And you can see it doesn't really like treat actual like psychiatric conditions. It's more like managing stress or like alleviating certain symptoms that might not be a full-fledged disorder. And so like this brings neuromodulation to spaces that are beyond clinical settings and allows it to be used in broader lifestyle support. So yeah, in that sense, it's less of a medical use of neurostimulation, but one that's still quite important and interesting to discuss. Okay, now we come to BrainSway, which is another non-invasive um, initiative that's targeted at advancing mental health healthcare. So they develop and market deep transcranial magnetic stimulation systems, which use H coils to stimulate deeper and broader brain regions compared to conventional TMS. So, like we discussed, like one of the main issues in non-invasive techniques is that we can't really target anything that we want specifically, but they aim to fix this and also answering your like point about like how do we like target different brain regions. You can see that these are two different designs and the coils look different because they're doing different things. So that's one of the ways we have a workaround around this issue. BrainSway technology is FDA cleared and it's used for major depressive disorder, OCD, and also smoking addiction, which is quite unusual and interesting, among expanding indications for other disorders. How this technology works is by using different types of code embedded in a patient and operator-friendly not magnet, helmet, and it targets the required brain region. So, for example, for depression, which is the one you see in blue, the coil is called H1 and it targets the bilateral prefrontal cortex, so that's at the front of the head. For OCD and anxious depression, the H7 coil targets the anterior cingulate and the medial prefrontal cortex. And for nicotine addiction, we have the H4 coil that targets the bilateral insular regions. So these are more related to emotions, etc. The insular does a lot of things outside of that as well. And again, the prefrontal cortex. So that you can kind of see a theme here if you're not like super familiar with neurobiology, that the prefrontal cortex does a lot of things. So that's why you have to also find different ways of targeting it depending on what we're trying to do. And why does this matter? Deep TMS provides a clinically validated and non-invasive therapeutic option for various mental health disorders, and this offers relief to many patients that again might not respond to medication instead. Yeah.
How does it go beyond like conventional TMS? What's the deep TMS actually mean?
I think it's mainly to do with it's mainly to do with like the shape of the coils. Like that's what they claim on their website. So essentially, like, through the different styles of coils, you should be able to target certain brain regions better, and hence more deeply. But yeah, deep does not. It's not like deep brain stimulation that you're actually in the brain. So that might be a little bit confusing, but it's still TMS. It's still like transcranial, but you're like not actually entering the brain. And then we have Soterix Medical, which specializes in non-invasive electrical modulation, but they're more focused towards clinical and research use. So a lot of these have been for patients who treat diseases, etc. But they more focus on providing researchers and lab groups with the devices and tools needed to conduct research that uses neuromodulation and neurostimulation. So this is a little bit of a difference compared to others. And so they design and supply advanced transcranial electrical stimulation systems and accessories to clinical trials and research centers. Their platforms support targeted stimulation, neuronavigation, and integration with brain monitoring tools. So this is similar to Medtronic, where you don't only have the stimulation, but you also have like a recording aspect. Soterix products are considered standard in the research settings and explore the therapeutic potential of non-invasive stimulation for depression, pain, and cognitive enhancement as well. So this is the other aspect. We have the clinical side, the more health and wellness side. But we also have the more like interesting like cognitive enhancement. Like, can you perform better? Can you be more focused, etc. And this helps support scientific discovery with clinical applications as they power these research efforts. And finally, we have Sonimind, which is
One. It is my favorite one.
well, interesting, yeah, it's interesting. You can share that later. A question about my a French neurotech startup developing a novel class of regulation technology that uses ultrasound. So we discussed ultrasound earlier as another way that neuromodulation devices can be powered. And what they do is that they're currently building a personalized, focused ultrasound-based neuromodulation system, and that targets deep brain regions to stimulate neural circuits that involve again in psychiatric and neurological conditions. And they have the first clinical trials planned for resistant depression. So this is like maybe the newest. It's less established than the others, but I think it's also important to like talk about the startups and like the newer things because that might be one of us soon. So it's good to like also know what people are coming up with like more recently. And they have recently announced a €3 million fundraising, including 2 million seed capital from Critical Path Ventures. So this is in addition to having secured support from the French government as part of the France 2030 initiative which is what the country is planning to do to produce better, live better, and foster greater understanding of our world. So it's a nice thing that also the government is sponsoring such innovations in neurotech. And why it matters is that ultrasound neuromodulation is a promise to reach deeper brain targets, again, in a non invasive way, for diseases that are otherwise difficult to treat. So that was a quick whistle stop tour for like these different companies. So we tried to choose some that have like some similarities between them, but also that they're quite different and they're not doing the same things. So we just have a couple of concluding questions for this section as well. So the first one is, if any, which companies did you already know about, or like Medtronic, yeah. And Medtronic is like very cool. Even like whenever you're like if you're on LinkedIn and you see like any like findings, it's like Medtronic is always somehow involved. So yeah, they're a very big company, but that's why we put like Sun and Mine at the end to like balance it out. Like like the big guys on the underdog. So yeah. Which one did they find most interesting? I think Alicia wants to share.
Well, I like focus ultrasound because there's a lot of research going to focus ultrasound and de-aging. So they're trying to. It says it has some sort of anti-tumor effect. And they're doing Imperial's doing a lot of research. King's is doing a lot of research into anti-tumor and de-aging processes in Alzheimer's, especially. So I'm interested. My supervisor is leading some of them. Oh, she keeps telling me about them. So yeah. No, my dissertation supervisor. She's like doing some stuff with focus ultrasound. Focus ultrasound is new compared to the TUS is just ultrasound, but like focus ultrasound is like a even newer type of. And a lot of studies are using like deep learning. So that's what I thought. I thought the TMS was like deep learning, like AI.
No, it's learning. They just using deep as like, we're better than regular because like it's more targeted.
Yeah, it's more targeted.
But yeah. Yeah, probably not the best adjective. Like someone should have stopped because like that's kind of get confusing. Like what are you talking about? Because it makes it sound like it's an invasive technique, even though it's not.
And I think ultrasound has the highest potential of it actually being portable. Like as in probably lowest barrier is I think it's ultrasound, electric and magnetic. I think.
Yeah, because like
it's safe as well.
Magnetic is like really
ultrasound safe, like literally, yeah. That's why I like those.
I like all of the ones that were going to potentially help patients with treatment-resistant depression. Like that's like my buzz thing in neurotech. I think that's so cool. And like you said, I think it's one of those things that obviously it's going to take, even if we have like a really good device or a really good therapy, it's going to take forever for it to be a first-line therapy on the NHS. And when we say a first-line therapy on the NHS, there are so many hoops that it has to jump through. It has to be safer than the available treatments. It has to be more effective than the available treatments. So I can imagine there's a while until then, but it would be nice to see it as more of an option period, because I think GPs and doctors and the NHS in general sort of treat depression as a thing where you, or a lot of mental health issues actually, where it's like you go to talking therapy and you have some medication, and then if that combination doesn't work, they sort of just alter it. They alter the dosages and the medications and the combinations until the cows come home, basically. And I think it's really infuriating, what should be really infuriating for some people. And yeah, I guess it also comes from people, or I suppose us not really knowing for sure what the cause of depression is. And then therefore they're like, well, if we do this therapy and it helps, we don't know what it's going to do long term. It's like, well, I could say the same thing about tricyclic antidepressants.
Yeah, like there's still arguments of whether like the monoamine hypothesis is even like a fit. Like is it actually how depression is caused? But there's enough evidence to say that it is the cause of depression as there is against it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like we're so far away. It's like it doesn't hurt to like use different techniques. But yeah, like a person I really like Soterix's work, which was like the one that didn't directly give devices to patients, but gave them more to like research groups and like the people who are doing the research. But that's like kind of like a forgotten thing. Like people are always like, okay, like I have like depression, like what tool can I use? But it's kind of like the people who are there to determine whether this can even be used for depression also need the tools. I think that's a really important niche that they fill in the field. So I don't know if anyone wants to share anything. Maybe which one you think has the greatest capacity for impact? Or I know it's like a lot. It's like a lot of like random names, so it's like fine if you don't remember. But yeah, even the one that had like different coils, different shapes, the TMS one. Yeah.
I think like falsetto was interesting because you don't have to do it close to it. It says on the website like 4 minutes twice a day.
Yeah.
For the impact. So I feel like that's gonna be used for like specific listener. Or for even like share with other people as well.
Yeah, exactly. And so even just like the positioning is like why either can do other things. It's not like something that takes away from like what you're doing like during your everyday life. So I think that would also be a very good option. And like we said, this like was more related to like wellness. So it could just be used like casually, I'd say, if you have like the money to like buy it, but casual. But yeah, it is like I think all of them are very good, but yeah. And so now that takes us to our third and final section. We're going to get more specific, up to date, and hopefully interactive. And it'll basically be a mini journal club. And we've shared, like I said earlier, we've shared the papers on our group chat. But you can just like look at it. We're going to have the names on, so like one just Google them and you can. And we have found very recent papers that are detailed new applications for brain modulation. And we want maybe you guys to take a little bit of time to like have a look if you haven't already, or like to go over your notes. I don't know how much time we should give for that, how much time we need.
I know that we send the papers out in the group chat. I know also that equally people don't always have time or access to that.
I would have read it if I wasn't.
Genuinely, honestly, me too. It's okay. It's a safe space. Can we just get a show of hands though in terms of how much?
Mine's first.
Yeah, she's doing the first one. How many people have read at least one of the papers or had a look at it? Okay,
No,
okay. It's not an
that's
issue.
great.
It's fine.
Yeah,
There's
I'll
obviously
say, yeah.
we kind of built the time in for you to go and have a little scan read of it, and then we can discuss. But I just wanted to know. Anyway.
Okay, so the first one is this one called Non-Pharmacological Mitigation of Acute Mental Stress Induced Sympathetic Arousal, and it's a comparison between median nerve stimulation and auricular vagus nerve stimulation. So before we give you time to like look at it, how many of you do neuroscience?
I'm not gonna do it right
Okay,
now.
so a lot of you. Like, what do the others do? Like biomedical sciences.
Neuro and psych.
Okay. Neuro and psych. Okay, so all of you are kind of familiar with, but just like I didn't know whether we had like a computer science.
Use the woman's playing the cranial nerves.
science. Like I just wanted to like break down some of the words. It's not as scary, but essentially like this paper is comparing two of the non-invasive techniques we've kind of covered. So we have median nerve stimulation, and that's where your median nerve is, and then we have auricular vagus nerve stimulation, which Aisha mentioned, and that's in your ear. But essentially, like non-pharmacological basically means neuromodulation. So that's why it's on our topic. They're not using like drugs or like any other form of therapy to do it. And what they're doing is treating acute mental stress. And how they're doing it, of course, stress is like very different in everyone. So like, how do you really measure someone's stress? Well, they're using sympathetic arousal. So like, if you remember, come year one, if you guys did that. The sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is like fight or flight response, which is what is activated when you're stressed. So that's what you're using to determine whether the stress response is alleviated by using these like techniques. And essentially, they're comparing which one is better. So if you guys want to have a look, also I'd suggest if you haven't looked at it yet to go to the discussion because that explains it quite well. But if you look at the results and you look at the figures, you're gonna get very scared. So yeah, like it's so many graphs and like plots. So yeah, if you guys just have like 5 minutes to have a little look, should we just also give the next people to look at the same time? I should do one.
Focus on this.
Probably,
It's
I'd
time,
say both
yeah.
of them are like obviously they're like big pieces of work. So maybe we'll just go one at a time. But as soon as you guys are ready to, once you've grasped what's going on and like pros and cons, or at least an idea of what the discussion is about, then we can move on. But we have plenty of time.
Yeah. Wait, what was the question? What was the system? Was it managed by?
The number one.
I'm so sorry to. I'm so sorry. Who we hear this? So,
Oh,
I'm not going to this. It's the day before.
what?
Is this?
Yeah.
How did I? I've already got tickets to Kew Gardens that way. That's the night for Valentine's Day.
Wait, is it actually?
No, it's
I bought
March.
mine
March.
Girls' March.
It's 13th of March. No? I swear it's the 13th of
No,
March.
it's the day before.
Day before Neurotech Summit,
Yeah,
yeah.
I've heard.
Watch Darian show up.
No, he doesn't drink.
Oh,
Good. What's he doing at the boat party?
For real.
that's so annoying.
Okay, it's gotten really overstated. It's getting really.
It's getting
too much.
So, here's what.
Yeah.
Let's come up with color palettes.
Yeah.
Like colors that we can think of together, and then we vote on which one we should look for, and then we make collections about it. And then like if you can do some gold, we can stick to like simple, then we can start to.
Yeah, I think right now, like I know there are some good ideas.
Yeah, we can then look back at them after
Similar
we.
to making yeah. I want it to be more, especially to be simpler.
Yeah, I get
to be more
Yeah,
just
no,
like a little bit more mature. Because it was a way not the end.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think maybe that's part, but yeah, definitely not with that.
Because there's a song called Colors.
Wow.
And it makes
Wow,
like
it's so creative.
no, you can make color palettes on it. I know this because of my self-entrepreneurship also, okay? So we had to make the whole branding before I started.
I think go straight to fly.
Yeah, and yeah, you can make like color palettes with it, and then you can like, keep generating different colors, and you can see like them looking together. So like,
Okay, cool.
yeah, so it's a good like idea to somewhere to start.
You know the color of GFP? That's what I'm thinking.
GFE.
The like neon green, but
Oh,
not
yes.
that. Like neon. No,
No,
not
that is
that.
neon
color
fluorescent.
No, not this.
How can I
It's like a
forget?
bit more blue,
Really?
a bit more dark. a bit
No,
more
but the
blue.
thing is,
You know the one.
I know what you're talking
Girl,
about,
I
but
was
like,
like,
It's with like a darker.
but it looks so unserious.
Yeah.
Did you see darker
green?
green?
It's
I
giving
have
emotional
50 images of GFT on my computer right now. I want to color
Dark
Did you
code
see
it.
the green and
Darker
purple
green.
ones? Like they look a little.
Yeah, I think we should
It's
see
dark
it.
purple.
Dark purple.
Yeah,
And dark green.
And
Like
dark
darker
Now
green.
that's
Wimbledon. That's Wimbledon, bro. Like, I mean, I do it.
No, I like purple.
I
like
just
emerald.
know it's purple. I feel like it's
college
college.
purple.
I feel like
Emerald
it's
is
too
good.
overused.
That's good,
That's
yeah.
the word I was looking for. Emerald.
Yeah,
emerald. Yeah.
As long
Okay.
as dark green. As long as we, yeah.
As long as it's not like black.
No, once it's
No,
like
no, no, no,
dark,
no,
it's like,
no,
why
disagree,
does
no.
it give me, like, a very fluorescent. So I'm like, of course you're gonna
I don't know why in my head like it's just fluorescent. You know under like the fluorescent microscope, like when it's blacked out. You know when you have to do like knockout validation. That's what I'm thinking of. Oh shit! Only me.
So it's such a good thing because I do have the app as well.
Okay.
It's like you get the color, you generate it until you see a color you like. And that's hidden in this one.
Yeah.
You generate it. Any of these.
It's not a bad color, but it's
Nothing is, I don't think it's with it. It's
And
just
you can
about
keep generating
So
them.
see like that a bit darker,
Okay.
that a bit darker.
You can also
Darker.
change the like tone.
choose that color. I don't know, it's like a bit strong.
But you can like
the
change
tones,
the
yeah.
Really?
So we, we, I'm
Okay, I like
having a
it.
check with.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean? Like
But I think really we need to start doing like the fact that we don't have a school. We are going to have to push things back. I think it's better than rushing to do it and not being able to do it blind, especially if we don't have options yet. Potentially, we could maybe do it through the summer term. We'll have fewer volunteers,
Yeah, that's what I
but the schools will have more time.
the GPS got posted to where
Okay, amazing.
Yeah.
Keep on that.
I
My
know.
appointment hasn't even my appointment hasn't come yet. I also have to renew my provisional, right? So therefore I have to do the TBS a different way. So
Have you received yours?
I was supposed
Oh,
to
I
be
haven't
meeting
received
with
mine, but
you.
it's supposed to have been.
I left it to last possible now, which was yesterday to Kevin. Why do I need the bank statement that's sent in the post?
Yeah, send the
Bro, like,
post.
small cases, they like not make.
sent in the post.
Yeah, you can, no, you can't print it. Because that's like the only thing I have for proof of
But to be
address.
fair, I
You
printed.
can
Can
print
you
it.
ask
I
me
can
to
do
talk
it, but
about
I've got like a council tax bill.
I'm gonna show you.
I'm gonna
Yeah,
download
I
it
have
and
anything
get
that
it
has my
online.
name on it. Like the bank statement is the only thing that has my name on my address. So that's the only
I think it's okay to have it online. I can download the PDF.
Download the
print-
PDF.
I
You have to print it.
I printed it out and then it's fine. Or you just get the one from your letterbox. I mean, I had both. So
Yes, I was wondering how they know that.
They're not gonna know. They're not gonna know.
So if it doesn't ignite, we can just Tuesday. If it doesn't come by like Wednesday, if it doesn't come by Wednesday evening, I'm putting on Wednesday.
So realistically, everything started something. We'll have to
I always think it's like either summertime or like there's some sports, you guys have to do it next time without I'm should be I'm still waiting for my other papers, just so which I don't do, but they only like I feel like they only have maths. I feel like they're so like they got kind of like not only them, like all the rules got so like right now my imperial offer already expired. Like I had the 4 weeks to accept and I get it. So like yeah, now it's like I'm pretty much going with the translated advanced therapies and medical device research.
I'm looking at advanced imaging. I guess that's my choice right now.
Oh yeah, you told me.
Advanced imaging.
Okay, so should we do you guys want to like it's fine if you didn't like we're gonna
We'll see.
tell you the pros and cons that we think are more
I've only submitted one.
My supervisors make me submit my project to a conference. He was like, he was like, you should do it where I'm gonna go.
so scary.
I know. Bro, I have to write this abstract for my conference.
So I can give you guys a brief summary of
Is everybody ready?
things. If you guys need more time or are you ready to like okay. So this is the first paper we're going to be looking at, and it was published just last year. And it looks at 2 different types of neurostimulation, like I mentioned earlier. And to briefly summarize the paper, the study design involved 19 healthy adults who were exposed to acute mental stressors, such as cognitive tests. And each participant received both MNS, like medial nerve stimulation, and AVNS, auricular vagus nerve stimulation. And this was during stress. The physiological responses were measured via various ways, including heart rate, blood pressure, stroke volume, cardiac output, and peripheral vasoconstriction. Hence why the term sympathetic arousal is mentioned in the title. And finally, through a synthetic multimodal variable, which is developed to measure complex multimodal physiological responses, it kind of aggregates all these different cardiovascular markers that they were measuring. And it's used to compare the 2 types of stimulation more easily. Overall, both techniques yielded positive results, but it was found that MNS was superior in terms of consistency and effectiveness. So, with that in mind, did anyone identify maybe any strengths of the paper, like anything you say, oh, like this is quite good? It was bad paper. I see. Okay. So some of the strengths we think apply to this paper is that it addresses significant knowledge gap. So it does like 2 comparisons of peripheral nerve targets. And why we think this is important is because, as we've seen like, throughout the presentation so far, there's like so many different techniques. So it's kind of like which one should we invest more in, which is more worthwhile to research further. So it's good to have like a starting point of like comparing 2 of them, and then we can extend this to like comparing all of them. And that's not to say that like if one shows up better in this study, we should completely disregard the other. But it's a good thing to keep in mind also when clinicians are presenting options to their patients maybe, and again in terms of like which one requires more intensive research. Then we also have like scientific rigor as a key strength of the paper, because they didn't focus on a single metric, which some papers do, like heart rate alone, for example, but instead they use the aggregated multimodal variable that captures a richer set of cardiovascular responses, so like both the heart rate and how much blood the heart is pumping out, for example, which are all interrelated but slightly different. And finally, there's also real-world applicability and usefulness, which is probably the most important one for us when we're talking about neurotech. So it's not just like aimless comparison of 2 random like stimulation techniques. It's actually like something that can potentially help patients like choose which wearable device they need to use, and yeah, in terms specifically of managing stress, which is very common, it's a good way of assessing them. So that's another strength, that they didn't just compare them in terms of like maybe treating like very rare disorder that not a lot of people have. They use it in terms of how do they manage stress, which is quite common. Any limitations before? This is what you can refer back to, like
launching new
what is-
limitations for everyone.
like any limitation here, yeah.
You didn't use subjective measures of stress, so is that limits the translate to good?
You didn't use subjective or objective?
They didn't use subjective.
Oh,
So
yeah.
they just used the physiology.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, exactly. True. Because I also have to ask. Like, I know we said like, oh, it's a good thing that they did that because it levels like the playing field comparing different patients. But would it be good to also incorporate, since they're already doing the multimodal variable thing, being interested to compare like maybe through a questionnaire, like how do the patients feel? Regarding the patients, is another like quite obvious thing that would maybe like could be considered a limitation.
What were the covariates of the study? Like, did they standardize in terms of age? Like, would participants match? They're like
I'm not sure. They just said like 19 healthy volunteers,
Yeah.
which I think is quite
suspicious.
Yeah, like first of all, healthy in what sense, and also 19 is a very small number.
Yeah.
Like obviously, like whenever you're in a journal club and you come up to limitation, just critique the samples out, but it's probably very small.
It's probably
Fair enough. Like it was a small study. Like it's a small. Like some studies are just small, but I think for studies such as these, or that are not like restricted due to like how niche the topic is, like they could have certainly recruited more people than that. It's not like you're looking at people who have a super rare disease and so it's hard to find participants. Like that's not the case. So I think that's something could have improved as well. And finally, like we've mentioned extensively throughout this presentation, and they also acknowledge it at the end of the paper if anyone got to that point. They do talk about the fact that their targeting might not have been optimal. So a lot of the variable results that they got might be due to non-precise engagement of target nerves. And yeah, again, they acknowledge this. But for example, this is not a problem only of this study. This is a problem of like throughout the whole field. So really how much we can critique it, I'm not sure. But it is something that we need to keep in mind in general when reading studies on this area. So yeah, I don't know if anyone has like any things to like know about the paper, like if they liked it, if not, and why.
I think it's interesting, like, I don't know if we should target healthy or populations experiencing something or not, because if you think of like, if this is expensive, it's probably better to prioritize using perhaps intervention. And then if it's like short-term stress, I'm probably not gonna seek something like this if I'm stressed for like 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's a
But
very
if
true.
everyone has one, then it's easy to separate it.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Because, like it's, I'm not saying to like not target healthy, but like why not do a comparison?
Yeah.
Or like people like maybe and people who have anxiety because like maybe they're more prone to everyday stress. And like why not compare the two populations? I mean, it is kind of like doing a phase 1 clinical trial because all drugs do start with healthy volunteers before you do it and test proof of concept, but they don't really treat it that way. They treat it more as both inclusive, so it's like it's not like they're saying, oh, this is like exploratory. In the future, like we're going to do the same thing, but people are more prone to experiencing stress. They don't say anything about it. So even just saying stuff that when you acknowledge that something goes wrong, it just makes the paper a lot better, I think. Yeah, so that is it. I think if no one else has like anything to add for this paper, now we can move on to the next one. And it is titled Non-Invasive Ultrasound Modulation of the Human Mucous Accumbens and How It Impacts Reward Sensitivity. And Aisha will take it away from you.
Yes, so there should be some, it's just that I learned how to screen grab on a Mac. So I appreciate that. But yes, that's the title of the paper. If you want to open it up and again, sort of maybe have a read of the abstract and the discussion. Because I think they give you a pretty good idea of the main elements of the study, like the kinds of volunteers, how many volunteers, what this actually is, like overall what they found. But I think I've already maybe got a couple of notes on it anyway, just to sort of give you an intro. So it's to do with focus ultrasound and non-invasively modulate the brain structure, so the mucous accumbens, the humans, and produce measurable behavioral and neural effects. Just to give you something to start off with, it uses low intensity focus ultrasound to reach deep brain regions without surgery, and bypasses depth limited TMS and TVCS. So yeah, if you have a little read, we'll give you a little bit of time and then we can discuss what's cool about it. I'll check. I've got something to get to. What were you saying? Oh, so excited. I completely forgot. We're going to a concert. Tuesday. Right.
Tuesday is also such a feral day.
Right. And it's with my Touchdown. First year. Twice.
No, it's in the
Roundhouse.
the roundhouse.
So, well, enjoy it.
I have to go away.
Lovely to see you guys. Missed you. Should plan something.
Yes, yeah.
We will just go to some next time.
Yeah.
See you. I traded you. Oh, okay.
This is good one.
Yeah, I know. It's just really sorry. I think she doesn't get like demos. Hopefully they'll be staying. So you're not going out for just like place on the presentation out because that's going to be something that that's the thing is the contract ends in June, but there's always an opportunity to extend if you want to, right? You get paid to extend your next one. And I can't train up to next one in turn, but I can't have to do that in a shorter period of time because even though there were a couple of research things I'm interested in, like supernatural scholars, which is one recommendation, I didn't want to go to Europe, so I didn't apply to any of the institutions. I was going to apply to Cambridge, but notoriously the lab supervisors I don't apply to European outside Cambridge already. So I didn't put an application in the end. Even though I contacted loads of like labs and Neurotech and research loads because they were so really so I decided I'm not going to do that. Like apply to Canada, so there's loads of great labs I can afford to what's on my neck. And then a couple of other internships we were really things that I was interested in, so most of them like I don't want to work in consulting, how do I say that? Like, it's not what I'm about. Not long term anyway. So I kind of it's like say like why is it no, because the human is yeah, and then I have an agenda and it currently looks like I don't extend that the days I need to so that might be I'm not sure how long I'm going to this everybody's going to know
She's in
Social workers are all going to feel probably like 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I don't know. It's not in the hands, it has to do with the rest of it. But yeah, I might do that. So there's a time back and do some like research on this one. I'm prepared for the next academic year. When I you guys hear this, it's like you never know. Okay. Whereabouts are we with paper reading? People deep in it still? Okay. So. There's not that much, I know, but yeah. I love my Cambridge stuff, but you'll be after someone. Yeah, yeah, but the time's oh yeah, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
First.
Okay. Yeah. What was another one called? Golden Eyes. Right, but it's such a pretty college. I love visiting that one. It's beautiful. Oh, okay, that's something. Yeah. I think it's going to be a much more experience than I love the camera because like home out of like well, I'm just going to anywhere else something like that. Now it feels like I'm because of the place with these cameras. Oh, that was specific. I will.
I think like further, okay, it's not that much, but it will be good. She's gonna crash out. She's actually crashing out. Genuinely. Again, it's like very consistent and everything is so good. You sound like a kid mother. Maybe I was just like, the easiest one to fight your head. Where I was like, okay, so has everybody managed to have a read of some of it at least? Okay, cool. So I'll also save the question that Wendy asked, which is, does anybody want to share any immediate strengths or limitations that come out to you, or just share any thoughts, or even just sort of explain a little bit about what the main findings of the paper are?
They're able to reach like deeper regions in the brain that usually
amazing. Yeah, so I think obviously I gave you a little bit of an intro that you probably read by now about what the target was and what the aims were. And then LIFU was used. But the researchers aimed were to test whether ultrasound can casually modulate activity in the nucleus accumbens to assess whether its modulation alters reward-related behavior. And short answer to whether that was fulfilled or not is yes. So stimulation altered both neural markers and behavioral responses linked towards reward processing. And then in terms of strengths and limitations, if nobody else wants to share, the strengths first. So first one was deep brain modulation without surgery, as the title suggests. So it demonstrates that ultrasound can reach and influence subcortical structures, overcoming the depth limitations of TMS and DCS whilst avoiding risks of DBS. Causal human evidence. So it shows direct intervention leads to neural and behavioral change, not just correlational imaging. It's also clinically relevant to target, so the nucleus accumbens is central to reward, mood, and addiction, giving the work clear therapeutic potential. It also has high translational value, so provides academic validation for industry efforts, for example, solar line, which we talked about earlier, aiming at non-invasive deep brain stimulation. And also it acts as a conceptual leap from Neurotech in a way. It sort of redefines non-invasive as potentially precise and deep, not just surface level, which, as we established before, it is an issue currently with non-invasive techniques for the most part. And then in terms of limitations, the main issue was, so there were 26 subjects, so slightly more than my new study, but a big issue from where I'm standing is that it was a healthy sample. So the effects may not generalize to clinical populations who would benefit most. The mechanism is also unclear from the standpoint of we don't really understand the precise biophysical action of the ultrasound on the neurons. So that still remains debated, so it limits optimization. There's also targeting variability. Skull and tissue differences mean identical settings can have produced different effects across individuals, and then that will continue to be the case if this were to be used in a wider population. Also, unknown long-term effects, so only short-term outcomes are tested, safety and plasticity over repeated use uncharacterized, and also practical barriers. So current systems are expensive and complex, making large-scale clinical deployment unrealistic currently. Having said that, I still thought it was a very interesting paper because, like I said, the main thing is that it sort of has taken that leap to be a non-invasive technique that is still precise and targeted, which I think is really interesting. Any other thoughts on the paper? Yes, Queen.
Yeah. Also, in terms of like the small healthy sample, I agree because if you guys don't know, like nucleus accumbens is like a very big part like addiction like studies. So looking at drug addiction. Drug addiction, I think, is like really like forgotten, except for like the one company that I mentioned that like did a code that's specific for smoking addiction. It's like not something that's ever mentioned, even though it's a huge problem in different like, facets, like from gambling to substances, etc. So I think it's kind of like a pity in a study that's like focused on the structure that we think is the most implicated in these like problems, not even address it at all. So obviously, like, a study can't do everything. So if they didn't do it, someone else can do it. But I think, yeah, it would have been interesting to at least mention it, like, in future directions, etc. Yeah, but overall, I think it is easier to find limitations in the paper when you're doing a journal than strengths. Because like strengths is kind of like, okay, yeah, the whole paper is good. I can pick out like the one things I like scratch my head at. But yeah, overall, I think both papers were like quite interesting and fit our theme well.
Yeah.
If you guys agree.
But the overall insight that I wrote down when I finished sort of finishing that section is just if ultrasound could reliably modulate deep brain circuits without surgery, it collapses the historical divide between invasive and non-invasive neurotech, like we discussed. And really exciting is that changes who potentially gets brain therapy. So I'm really excited for this in the future direction of neurotech. And then in terms of what's coming up and concluding this event, first of all, thank you again so much for coming to this event. in terms of what's coming up, we actually have a few things that we're really excited about. So our next event is something called Brains, Barriers and Pathways, Understanding Educational Inequality and Taking Action. So this is an event in support of our Youth in Neurotech campaign, which I know we've announced on Instagram, LinkedIn and whatever, but like it is so important to us and so sort of foundational to what we create the society for. Like I think when you go to a lot of neurotechs, I hope outside of KCL Neurotech, I feel like there's a certain demographic of attendee, which I'm really excited to see is not what's in the room right now.
Yeah, I noticed that right away. I was like, that's
Yeah,
really good.
I'm
but,
really,
yeah.
really pleased with like what we're doing here and sort of like the turnout and the sorts of people who are coming and how engaged you guys are. But yeah, when you go to sometimes when you go to events outside, it's like the same few people who are like same usual suspects who are like white, male, very busy, have had a good education and disability, and that's brilliant. And I'm not saying they're not smart and deserving, but it's so nice to be able to come together as a society where the university has every kind of person and every kind of cause, and to say, listen, there is a place for you in this industry. So that the idea of the team is basically, not to drag this session on too much, is to go and deliver workshops, I think for about 6 weeks in a local state school, so somewhere in Southwark or Westminster, with some volunteers from the society, and give about 6 workshops for years 10 and year 12 that are level appropriate on neurotech and options in neurotech and options in higher education beyond just getting into university and getting a degree. So it's something that can run the personal savings, but also I think the rationale there is that unfortunately the statistics about higher education and access to higher education are upsetting, but what's also interesting is the rates of state educated versus private educated students in higher education for dropping out. And so after the first year, the amount of them that are still remaining in higher education is sad to see. And I think maybe some of that is fueled by lack of opportunity, lack of being able to know what comes beyond the degree and what sort of career path you can do. So yeah, we're really excited to run that scheme. But the event that we're running, which is what I'm actually talking about here, will be on February 12th, so that's Thursday, that's during volunteering week here at KCL. And we've been given funding, so there'll be a lot of free food. So please, if for nothing else, you just come for that. Please do if you're available, come for that. And yeah, it's basically going to be a discussion about different educational journeys that people have had. It's going to be more of an interactive event, so it's not going to be just neurotech focused. It's more to do with what we believe our society is about. But yeah, it's really important to us. So please do sign up and come along if you would like some free food. That's actually going to be at Bush House, so Strand, which is different for us, but also so that we aim to be across campuses. So we'll deliver more of those. And then the following event will be our Coding for Neurotech workshop number 3 to do with neural networks. And that will be here in this classroom, guys, on the 19th of February. After that, we have a speaker event with Toby Wise, all about computational neuroscience and neuroimaging for anxiety and mood disorders on the 3rd of March here on Guys. And we're going to announce something very big soon, something else very big soon, that's happening on the 14th of March. So if you can, keep your calendar clear and hopefully we'll be posting about that soon. But yeah, that's what's coming up. I don't think I've missed anything. I think I'm down to your ear off now. But yeah, thank you again so much for coming to this event, and hopefully we'll see you at our next event, which really excited for. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, guys. You can look up. And I will. Just make sure.